My lesson this morning is taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. And he's going to read the verses for us to begin.
For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Amen.
Thank you. Before I begin, I might just mention if anybody wants to donate individually to the line work, either by cash or check, give it to me. We send money to them every single month for the blind work. So that's the best way for you to get the money to them. So just give it to me and we'll keep up with it. Then the first of the month we'll send it to them. If you write a check, make the check out to the Strickland Church of Christ, which is our sponsoring church. And we'll make sure all the funds go to him then. You know, we all recognize the need for physical endurance. We admire people who spend time in exercising and developing their physical endurance. Now, if you're like me, so I think some people go to the extreme. You know, some people run these Ironman marathons and so forth. I can hardly imagine running one marathon, much less doing all of the three. There was a man by the name of Edward Kelly. He was the first man to run 3,000 miles. He did it in 46 days and 6 hours, which is an average of 64 miles a day. Now, if you're like me, that's kind of taking to the extreme. But we do admire people who are willing and able to do that much. Well, you know, we need spiritual endurance just as much, maybe more so. And we often think spiritual endurance is one of those things just kind of happens. If you ever wonder how Paul could endure all the things that he did, I've wondered that many times. I'm pretty sure if I've covered anything like what Paul did, I would have quit a long, long time ago. How could Paul undergo all the things that he did and remain faithful? And then we look at people today who encounter almost nothing, and yet they leave the church and leave God completely. Maybe one person says something or doesn't say something or does some little something which to us seems very insignificant, but to them it's very bad and very major, and because that one person did something, they leave the church, never to be seen again. You wonder how could they leave God over such a minor thing, it seems like, and yet Paul endures physical suffering to an nth degree and even death and so forth, and remain faithful all those years. What's the difference? Well, obviously the difference is endurance. And Paul here discusses the idea of spiritual endurance. And I think Paul here gives us the reason why he was able to endure all the things that he did and remain faithful. And if we tried to do these same things, then we would remain faithful as well. You know, why should we? Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Obviously, that's what the practical definition of faith is. It's looking at the unseen. And that's what we need to make sure we're focusing on, is that we look at the things that's not seen. And if we do, we will not faint. Notice in verse 16 said, therefore we do not lose heart. Paul earlier in this chapter had talked about all the things, or at least some of the things that he endured and some of the problems he encountered. And yet Paul said, we do not lose heart. We do not quit. We need to make sure that we realize that we're all going to die. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. You know, we're all going to die, of course. But death should not frighten us. It's really the doorway to something that is far better. And that's what we've got to keep in mind. But we see the process of aging. Even before death, we all see the process of aging. And we see it in our own lives. As we get older, we begin to lose the ability to do some of the things that we used to do without even a thought. Our bodies hurt a lot more than they used to be. We endure a lot more pain and suffering. We get a little slower as we go along. Nothing big, but just over the process of time, our bodies slowly deteriorate. Well, I can imagine Paul endured all the same things as well. You know, sometimes people will talk about, I've got a back problem, knee problems, whatever, and it goes back to some injury that happened maybe 30 or 40 years earlier. Maybe a football injury or a car wreck or whatever. And it looked like they completely recovered from it, but sometime later in the life, problem developed. Well, I'm sure Paul probably endured those same things with some of the beatings and other things that he endured. As his body got older and deteriorated, I'm sure he had some of the same problems that we did, and we do. We know Paul had a thorn in the flesh, so he endured a lot of things besides that. Paul himself said his flesh was wasting away. Here he says, our outward man is perishing, but the inward man is being renewed day by day. Paul faced discouragement from many sides. And we would like to think, wouldn't it be nice to know that as we got older, your body got stronger? Obviously, that's not going to happen. From a physical standpoint, at least, it won't happen. But from a spiritual standpoint, it should. From a spiritual standpoint, it should get stronger because our bodies are being renewed day by day. And we see this, I think. We all seen some people who their body got old and wasted away, but there was nothing wrong with their spiritual man. You can see it by the way they talked, the way they lived. Even though from a fleshly standpoint, they didn't have much going for them anymore. And yet from the spiritual standpoint, they were stronger than anybody else. Because their bodies had been, their spiritual person had been renewed day by day. You see, how can we go about not fainting? And there's several things we can do so we won't faint. One is prayer. Jesus wrote in Luke chapter 18, he spoke a parable, then men ought always to pray and not to faint. So we need to make sure we spend time in prayer. The world thinks prayer is the pitiful cry of someone who's weak and have nothing else to depend on. They're not strong enough to depend on themselves, and so they want to depend on some imaginary feller out there somewhere or another, so they call that prayer. That's what the world thinks prayer is, but of course the Bible makes it very clear that God can do something and will do something for his people. But then we also see, Peter wrote in 1 Peter 3 verse 12, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Not only does the Lord not help those who do evil, the Lord is actually going to fight against those that do evil. So if we want to make sure that we will not faint, then we make sure we spend time speaking with God in prayer. Yes, the Christian knows there is a God who will bless us. Again, the Apostle John wrote in 1 John 5 and verse 14, this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. We should have the confidence that God will bless us. If there's a God in heaven, and we know there is, then we should have the confidence that God will bless us in doing that. We have the blessings of God's mercy. Again, 2 Corinthians 4 verse 1, a little bit earlier in this same chapter, Paul wrote, therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. Knowledge of God's mercy will help us so we don't lose heart. And of course, then in Galatians 6 verse 9, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap. But notice, if we do not faint. That's the promise that we have, and that's one way we know we won't faint, by keeping our eyes on the unseen and realizing that we will inherit and receive a great blessing. We can consider Christ. The writer of Hebrews talked about this in Hebrews 12 verse 3. For consider him, Christ, who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged. Here, writer of Hebrews points out when we take our eyes off Jesus, that's when we become discouraged. We think about the Apostle Peter. You remember one time he was in the Sea of Galilee with all the other disciples, and a great storm came up. So they saw Jesus walking towards them, and Peter said, Lord, let me come to you. And so Jesus said, well, come on. So very impetuously, Peter got out of the boat, began walking on the water, and as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to do the impossible. But then the scripture said he took his eyes off Jesus. That's when he began to think. And so in the spiritual way, the same thing is true today. As long as our eyes is focused on Jesus and on the unseen, we will not faint. When you take our eyes off Jesus, that's when you begin to have trouble. You see, in contrast to that, our inward man is being renewed day by day. Our spiritual person actually gets stronger as we go through life. And then we come to verse 17, where Paul compares the things we go through here with what's waiting for us. And he starts out by saying our light affliction. Now, when we think about that in regard to Paul, we sometimes wonder, how could you say that? I don't think any of us would say that the things Paul endured were light. And I'm sure Paul did not think they were light when he was undergoing those things. But he said they were light and they are temporary, at least in relation to what's waiting for us. And as long as we focus on that, then we will begin to fear. And when you begin to fear, of course, then that's when you lose confidence and you lose heart and you begin to quit. Fear magnifies afflictions. I'm sure you've been in the dark, maybe laying in your bed at night, and you hear some sound. And you hear that sound, your mind begins to imagine all kinds of things. You hear the same sound in the daytime, you won't even notice it. But at night, oh man, it becomes very loud. And as I said, you begin to imagine all kinds of scenarios. None of them good. Fear magnifies your afflictions. You say that Paul did not focus on the afflictions though. He said they were light and they are temporary. They're light in relation to what's waiting for us, of course. And they are only temporary. They're going to last for a short period of time. And Paul realized he would not fear because he knows that these things is working for us something that is far better. Notice he said he's working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight. The afflictions here are light, but it's working for us something that is weighty, very heavy. And of course, the things here is temporary. The things that's working for us is eternal. Obviously, something that is eternal is of far more value than what's only going to last for a short period of time. That's why we don't pay attention to the things of this world, and we don't fear the things of this world. You know, Peter wrote 1 Peter 1, verses 3 through 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance, notice, incorruptible and undefiled, and that does not fade away. It's eternal. As I said, obviously something eternal is of far more value than something going to last just a short period of time. The problem is many people in this world, they pay little attention to the unseen. They focus all their attention on the things of this world. You know, we can endure a lot of things as long as we have hope. It's when we begin to lose hope that you begin to want to give up. As long as you think that whatever it is you may be suffering, as long as you think, well, it's going to be over in a short time. It's going to be over in a week or two or a month or whatever. As long as you got some kind of hope that eventually I'll get over this. But when you begin to think, it's not going to get any better. I'm going to have the same problem over and over from now on. And it's only going to get worse. When you have that kind of idea, that's when you lose hope. You want to just quit and just give up. That's when people kill themselves because they have no hope of anything better. Here Paul said we can always have hope. I don't care how bad your life is, what kind of afflictions you might be encountering. We can always have hope. Why? Because this is not the end. The things of this world is only temporary. But what we suffer here is working for us something far more exceeding, and it is eternal. That's why we don't give up. We always keep our eyes focused on God. And then we come to verse 18. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. You know, it's difficult to keep our eyes off the things which are seen. Because obviously it's all around us. We see it every day. The last thing you see when you go to bed at night is the physical things around you. First thing you see when you wake up in the morning is the physical things. It's very difficult to keep our eyes off the seen things. But you cannot focus on two things at once. Have you ever thought about that? You cannot really focus on two things at once. For example, if I put my hand up in front of my face, obviously right now I'm looking at you. I know my hand is there, yes. But it's blurry. I don't pay any attention to it. On the other hand, if I was to focus on my hand, then you would become blurry. And I would not be able to pay much attention to what you're doing. You cannot focus on two things at once. Well, spiritually speaking, I think pretty much the same thing is true. We cannot focus on the things of this world all the time and then at the same time focus on God. If you're focusing on the things of this world, then the things of God takes a back seat and you pay little attention to that. On the other hand, if you're focusing on God, then the things of this world takes a back seat and you don't pay too much attention to the things of this world. And Paul here wanted to point out we need to make sure that we don't focus on the seen things. Why? Because again, it is temporary. Why focus on something that's only going to be here a short period of time? Many people, on the other hand, that's exactly what they do want to focus on. They want to focus on this world. And they will say, why should we focus on the next world when we don't even know there's going to be a next world? I mean, you haven't seen it. You haven't talked to anybody who's seen it. How do you even know there's going to be another world? So why should you focus on that world, which may not even exist, and pay little attention to things of this world? And so I want to make sure I'm focusing on this world. And if there is a next world, well, I'll take care of that when it comes. They have enough confidence in their own strength and their own ability that whatever problems they'll encounter in the next world, they can solve those problems. They'll work on that when it comes. But for now, They're going to focus right here because that's where we are. Obviously, that's not Paul's idea. And he's encouraging the people, us, and the Corinthians, not to do that either. Why? Because the things of this world are only temporary. For the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. We don't focus on the things of this world because it's all going to pass away. Your most precious possessions is going to soon be gone. Your most precious loved one will soon be gone. You're going to soon be gone. And therefore, why pay attention to the things of this world so much? And lose the things which is far more valuable, which of course is the eternal. That's why Paul would say in Colossians 3 verse 2, set your attention or mind on things above, not on things on the earth. God has revealed to us in some small way what's waiting for us. Obviously, there's no way we can really comprehend that. But in order to give us at least some idea of what's waiting for us, God has described for it in some comparison way to the things we have in this world. But we can rest assured that whatever it is going to be far better than the things we have described for us. On the other hand, I think we can also say hell's going to be far worse than what's described for us, as bad as what that is even. It's going to be far worse than that. We need to make sure our focus is on what is truly important. We sometimes sing a song, I'm sure you do here, won't it be wonderful there? Beautiful song, isn't it? That's what we need to make sure it is. We keep our minds on what's waiting for us because it surely will be wonderful there. As long as our minds and our eyes is focused on the unseen, then we will not faint, we will not lose heart, and we will not give up. And we don't give up because that is eternal. And that's why we focus on that rather than anything else. We need to make sure we must not have any doubt. Notice chapter 5, verse 1. Paul said, for we know. Notice he did not say, I think, I hope, I wish, I believe. But he said, we know that if our earthly house is destroyed, or earthly tent is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. We can rest assured we have something waiting for us. If you believe there's a God, we can believe and know that God has something waiting for us. And that's what we need to keep focus on. And as long as we keep our eyes focused on that, then we won't lose heart. We won't give up. Why? Because that's the most important thing in our life. But the problem is we again lose, we focus, we move our attention away from that to the things of this world. And that's when we begin to give up. But we must not do that. Why? Because that is eternal. We know God will not break his promises. So tonight then, or this morning, I want to ask you, where is your mind? Where is your attention focused? I'm sure all of us at times have had our attention focused on the things of this world. We've all done that, I'm sure, at times. But where's your attention now? Is it on the unseen, the eternal, or is it on the things of this world? We need to make sure our attention is always focused on the unseen, because that is eternal. And if that's where your attention is, you won't give up. You will not faint. We'll only faint if we move our attention away from that. So hopefully this will encourage each one of us to make sure we keep our attention focused on the right things, and to make sure our attention is focused on the right things. If you need to respond in any way this morning, we hope you come. If you need to be baptized into Christ or just confess your faults and prayers for the church, then we urge you to do so while we stand and sing the invitation.